Hey guys, welcome to a special edition of the Inside Scoop. I just wrapped up a longer form interview with Coach Rory on the challenges we have with the financial cost to participate in youth soccer, the pay to play, the pro real, the issues. But Coach, I just wanted to get your opinions in a shorter form, especially about the macro issues for our Facebook group. So welcome to the show, Coach.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, it's been great discussing this with you this afternoon. And my big thing is really trying to get people educated on what I call the macro issues or the macro view of why the costs of youth soccer in this country are so high. I mean, most people are going to focus on the micro issues. And again, I want to make sure when I say micro, I'm not saying these issues are small or unimportant, but they pale in comparison to the system. So a micro issue would be something like how much tuition is at a club, how much a field costs, how much travel costs. That is all encapsulated and basically accounted for by the ecosystem that we have in this country. And specifically, that ecosystem is set up just by design for costs to increase or costs to be put onto parents, whereas the system in other countries is set up to decrease costs for parents or for players. And so, that's really the biggest, I think, takeaway point to that. I'll just compare quickly why I feel that's the case. In the US, when you look at clubs and how they generate revenue, you really can only generate revenue by parent tuition or player tuition or with sponsorships. And sponsorships are hard to get, and most clubs are not funding a huge percentage of their budget based on sponsorships. Clubs internationally across the world have other ways of generating revenue. And we talked about this in the full form version of the podcast, but training compensation and solidarity payments, first team revenue, club memberships, and then sponsorships, which sponsorships for clubs with first teams tend to bring in more money. And then lastly would be the tuition piece. So you have these international clubs who have many other sources of revenue, and that can drive down the costs. That in the setting of competitive environment, promotion, relegation, and the things that we talked about in the longer version kind of set you up to have to pay more money in this country.
Yeah. So when I think about the ecosystem, and I'm just going to throw out some terms, it's the sort of how revenue is being generated, which you mentioned. It's the cost of licensure, which appears to be relatively higher here for our coaches to get their licensure. It's the league structure that the clubs are operating in, and the power and influence those leagues have, some would argue, is disproportionate. It's the sort of consumer education of the parents and their ability to discern a club that's a good fit from a development perspective. And then there appears to be this emphasis on that top 1 or 2%, and that is guiding sort of the policies that are being made in youth soccer as opposed to the 80% of kids who are just playing. And when I speak to parents, what I hear them say, and they don't verbally explain it this way, but what I hear them say is they don't always explain it this way in this level of detail. I want my kid to have fun. I want my kid to play at a competitive level that works for them. If we can get that without traveling, I'm all forward for that. But if it requires us to travel in order for, and it requires us to pay for these expensive clubs, I'm willing to do whatever it takes for my child to develop. And what I'm hearing them say is the alternative is not very attractive to me. We tried rec, and our kid grew out of that. So my policy prescription, if I were the czar of U.S. soccer, would be, number one, we have to create a transparent league structure, at least at the state level, that is inclusive and has some degree of promotion relegation and actually supports coaches and club directors who want to start smaller clubs and develop players by giving them access to local teams and competition. We do need to educate parents to some degree on what it looks like to have a kid and that's developing and having fun, and how the coach, is an important driver of that. But your early exposure to the game, how much fun they're and how much they're playing with, how much they're playing the game outside of the structured environment, the individual training they're doing at home, all of those things are also important drivers. And then ultimately, there's a role for the ECNLs and the MLS Nexus and the MPLs. But I personally believe that should be reserved as they should be operators of the top of the pyramid. And becoming a member of those leagues is still part of a pro real and meritocracy. And so I'm giving a short version because I wanted this to be a short clip. I know there's a lot of politics there. I know a lot of operators throughout the country are doing this, but we just have not done it in a unified level. Final thoughts.
No, well said. Yeah, I think it's how do you get the structure right? How do you get the structure to be in place where a lot of, because look, that's the other thing too. You always talk about people listening to this and they're screaming on the other side of the dial. There are a lot of problems and corruption in the world when it comes to youth soccer, agents, development, all that stuff. So I'm not remotely suggesting that it's absolutely perfect in Argentina, in other places, but there are guide rails and there are things that are set up where there are some protections. And to your point, there is something merit-based. There is something about, you win a league, you go up, you don't, you go down, even at the youth levels. And that has ramifications all across the ecosystem.
Guys, I had a longer interview and a longer conversation with Coach Rory, but I wanted to do this short form interview so you guys can hear some content straight to the point. And this is going to come out before the longer one. If you have any feedback, if you want to come on the show, if you're doing something unique or something that you want to share with our audience, I welcome you to the show as well. My name is Neil Crawford. I'm the founder of Anytime Soccer Training. Let's get better together.